Recording, that's good. So, good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to see everybody here today. My name is Christian Harrison, and I'm privileged to be the facilitator of the research seminars series of the School of Business and Creative Industries of University of the West of Scotland. And we have been doing this for close to 2 years now. I was talking to some of my colleagues in the research forum. I'm like, wow, this has been going on. And we've had research seminars this is going to be the 39th, no, this is going to be the 40th seminar we've had over the last 2 years. So it's been going on and off. It has been going on and it has been very, very impressive. And I would like to say thank you to everybody that has supported the research seminar series over the years. And it's great to see everybody here today. And like I always say, feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat. Feel free to tell us where you're coming from. So one of the things that has become a tradition when we started is we had a speaker that was in 2021 that said, try and introduce yourself in your native language in the chat. And we started to see people that were using Gaelic, Mandarin, Yoruba, so you can be creative and introduce yourselves in the chat. But it's great to know that we have people coming here clearly. Of course, it's great when we see people's faces. So I'm happy that many of us have decided to put our cameras on. So it's great to always place a face to the name. So I will always encourage that if you want. But of course, if you don't want to as well, it's also okay with us. But the rules of engagement, please mute yourself while you're not talking, because so that it would not affect Josh and every other person here. And importantly as well, it's online. So if there's an emergency, hopefully there won't be in your house, please. That's more important. So you don't need to stay until the end. So you can always take care of that. And of course, if it was face to face, we'd have had coffee or biscuits, but we don't have that. So feel free to take water like I am taking at the moment if you want to keep yourself busy. But of course, it's great. I'm trying to see how we can get more people in. But of course, as we go along, we will try to get more people. So I can see a lot of people introducing themselves in the chat. Thank you so much for doing that. But today's, okay, I can see Charis, okay, good, from London. So a lot of people are from different parts of the world, and that is great as well. So today we'll be looking at one very important topic. And it's
literature review lecture, how exciting.
Okay, good. So it cuts across almost everything that we always speak about. And whether you're a researcher, you're in your late career, your early career, your mid-career, literature is even as a student, literature is important because you can't do research without building on past literature. And in looking at literature, most of the time, the question comes, how do you search for the right literature? What do you need to do in getting the right literature? How do you ensure that literature that you're using to build your research is the right one? I think a couple of weeks ago, we spoke about conducting a systematic literature review, where I spoke about doing that. But one important thing, before you can conduct a literature review, you also need to know how to search for literature. And during this session today, no pressure on Josh, that is what he's going to be covering. And we have a very strong and very important and valuable resource person in the house that will be telling us so much and teaching us on how we can conduct a proper literature search. And what I've done is I will introduce Josh so I can get to know much more about Josh today. So if you want to know about conducting a very strong research strategy, then this session will provide all that information. But who is Josh? Joshua Cheyne is the academic support librarian of the School of Business and Creative Industries in the University of the West of Scotland. He's highly skilled and knowledgeable, and he has been a librarian for over 10 years. He has so much specialist knowledge on research management, and he conducts and works with the NHS, academic and primary and third independent sectors. He has extensive experience conducting in-depth research. He has researched new emerging health innovations, conducted several search strategies, search methods consultancy, does a lot of deliverable complex information, and works with client requirements. So this is really Josh's forte, and he'll be telling us so much about how to conduct a literature search. So first, I'd like to tell Josh thank you, because when I approached him, he promised I was going to do this, and today he is here and is going to do it today. So thank you so much, Josh, for being here today. So I will give Josh the floor, and Josh will present. And after that, please feel free to ask Josh any questions at all. There is no silly question. That is why we are here, so you can learn much more about how to search for the right literature. So thank you so much, Josh, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian. As you said, my name is Joshua Cheyne. I work here at the University of the West of Scotland, based in Paisley, and this is how we are going to conduct ourselves today. Let me just... Right. I think that's working. There we go. Right, I'm going to assume everybody can see that.
Yeah,
but perfect. Right, what I'm going to be doing today is introducing the topic of literature searching, basically the mechanics of how you take your research questions, so the thing you want to answer, and put it into a format that the databases, search engines, basically how are you actually going to find it. Next slide. This won't become obvious until a little bit later on, but it's something I wanted to introduce at this point in time. Basically, the principles of topic of discussion make more sense as the talk progresses, and also this just means I can be a bit self-indulgent with my own interests, and for no other reason, I really like magpies. So, I mean, a search strategy, there's a difference between a search strategy and search methods. Search methods are the places where you're going to look and how you're going to do it. And the search strategy are the actual search lines and search terms you're going to be using. It's a crucial aspect of conducting a comprehensive and effective literature review. In fact, I'd say it's essential for conducting any kind of in-depth research. Useful for identifying relevant studies and avoiding missing important information, saves time and effort in the long run, avoids risk of bias in your sources. It ensures your work can be reproduced, enhances the quality, and increases the credibility of your findings. And it's difficult to say this without talking about Google at this stage. Google is a very, very powerful search engine, but it's not designed, say, specifically for academic research. There really are limits as to how you can use it. It doesn't really work with very, very complex command lines. So you do have to be aware of some of, not just Google, but some of the resources limitations. And well, most people, even me, use it. And it's a useful starting point. But also be aware that the ranking algorithms used by Google can sometimes prioritize articles that are more heavily cited or have more kind of online attention rather than the ones that are more relevant to your search. So it's fine at the beginning, but if you're looking to go much more in depth, you need to look at some much better sources. And this is just a generalized step-by-step of the literature search process. And it's a literature search process as I've experienced it over the years. Most of my background is working within healthcare, but broadly speaking, this process can be applied to any discipline. And there are a few people that have tried to codify it and been very successful with it, but it's difficult to generalize it. One thing I'd like to especially draw your attention to is creating and maintaining a log document throughout the process. This is something I do with each and every search I do, and I have done with about 190 systematic reviews I've been involved with. It's something that will pay dividends much later in the process when you come to write up your results. Now, the reason rubber duck debugging is a term used in programming, but the idea is when you can speak a problem aloud and try and speak a problem to yourself and say roughly to a non-judgmental rubber duck on your desk what you're trying to do, things seem much, much less intimidating. But it's saying, I mean, this talk could cover an entire day, but what I'm mainly going to focus on is the search strategy formulation. And now you've, being a diligent UWS or wherever you're based, university staff, you'll have all attended your inductions, so no excuses. You should all know this already. But for the sake of making no presumptions and casting no aspersions, I'll go over this. You've got access to an exceptionally talented and trained and well-provisioned library services team here at UWS who cover undergrad, postgrad, research staff, lecturers, university staff, basically anyone that's here. So contact us if you've got any specific or general requirements. Please don't begin your request with, I know this sounds daft, but, because probably not. So just try me. In my experience, just about every question or inquiry is an unmet need. And it's something that may need to be unpacked as we go along. You may have that question to begin with, but that question can quickly grow arms and legs. And I like inquiries like that. There's maybe more layers to a question, more substrates and layers than you realize. And it's my job to help you get the information you need, the useful information you need, regardless of your level of knowledge and expertise. So it's always best to approach any request like this, from my point of view, with a very open mind. And I've had the privilege of working with some extraordinarily talented researchers over the years, and they all have the same questions and concerns. So from undergrad level right up to experienced senior research level, speaking my mind, and as a constant reminder to myself, everyone asks the same daft questions, well, questions that they assume are going to be daft, and they all encounter the same problems. There's nothing new under the sun with this. So don't worry if you think your question sounds a bit silly. Chances are probably isn't. And this is where it's a dependable place to start. I'm somewhat jumping the gun here, but finding a good starting point for any piece of research is difficult. It's like the blank page. What do you write on the blank page? So at UWS, we have UWS Library Catalogue 1 search. And I'll just go over a little bit. I'll leave this information here just for a moment. But here are the key points I would go to. Creating a clear question, and it's the most difficult, one of the most difficult parts of any search is knowing how to translate that question into something you can actually look for. So diving into literature review without having a clear question, it leads to lost time, frustration. I mean, vague questions will create vague answers. And worse still, when you start searching, you'll likely retrieve an overwhelming number of results. So take the time at the beginning to plan your question and unpack it. You may even need to adjust your question slightly after you do some reconnaissance searches and some scoping searches. Also, when you write your search with the best outcome in mind, a collection of documents that addresses your question. To a certain extent, you have to assume that what you want exists. And at a philosophical level, that's interesting because it takes a long time for a research gap, a research question to manifest itself as an information need, let alone as a question. It involves exploring assumptions and questioning existing knowledge and seeking to establish new insights. And I hadn't really thought about this until recently. A research question can be seen as a creative act in itself for understanding a subject. So you need to take an open-minded approach to this inquiry and a willingness to challenge assumptions. Ultimately, research question is a statement of curiosity, and you have to think a little deeper about it because there will be questions beneath the surface that you need to explore before you start throwing words into search engines. Otherwise, that just leads to far too much frustration at the very, very beginning of the process, which can be very, very disheartening. And I know this even at my stage. You're tempted to jump the gun and just get stuck in immediately. But if it's a complex research question, you need to do some exploring and deconstruct the question to identify the key concepts underlying it. There will be explicit, implicit, sub-questions, and it's worth taking the time to take a look at these, and how much time you spend on it will depend entirely on your question. So I go back to maintaining a log of your search to help you stay organized. A lot of databases say database platforms will have personalized account options. So do make use of those features to sign in and save your searches so you can rerun them. Keep a log document of your search, so where you've looked, what's worked, what hasn't, new terms, ideas, and use that as a backup for your searches. Essentially, this works. This saves you a lot of time and avoids repeating mistakes in the future. And when it comes to writing up your methods at the end, it ensures you have a repeatable, auditable process, and you can see where each and every one of your terms and words has come from. And I like using text files because they are portable, compatible with just most operating systems, small file size, easy to search, no formatting issues. And you can quite easily copy and paste your searches from them into databases like, well, any databases you care to mention. There's no special characters really, so you don't have to worry about them creating errors. And it means that each search you have will have a rationale and an explanation of the decision-making process that underpins it. So planning your search and know your item types. This will largely dictate where you search. And at the beginning, when you're doing some, what I would call reconnaissance or scoping searches, at this stage, you're not really looking to retrieve anything. And that's quite deliberate. You may find some useful stuff, but what you're doing is doing what I call just some quick and dirty and informal searches in Google and some known sources that you have. The entire point is that I'm going to go on the assumption that maybe at this stage you don't know much about it, but you know enough about it to put the question in a context. So use some very, very broad terms to conduct some basic searches and to get a sense of the range of potentially relevant literature, or what research or key research you already know about. And this may help form the basis of your protocol. So what kind of research will be necessary? It may be that it's not just database searches that will be the core of your search. It's entirely possible that that won't be it. So, I mean, like I said, what resources you search for, it depends entirely on your question. So this is quite a difficult slide to say, but it may even be necessary to adjust your question at this stage if you're not finding very much. So take your time at the beginning to get it wrong. And it's, like I say, at this stage, you're not exactly seeking to answer your question. This is essentially just putting your question in a bit of in much wider context and finding a few key papers. You also maybe want to have a look and see whether or not there's already existing research which answers your question, in which case, like I say, it may be necessary to adjust your question a little bit. And there's things like research registers. I mean, if you're in healthcare, something like Prospero is quite good because you can see ongoing systematic reviews. Or if you're on the Cochrane Library, for example, you can see systematic reviews, protocols that have been published. So it may be that your question's already being dealt with. So at the very, very beginning, when you're planning your search, select an appropriate database and interface at the very beginning to write and test your draft searches. Now, when I did these searches in my last job, I always reverted to Medline on the Ovid Medline on the Ovid platform, but that was just because it was the one I knew well, and it was the core database within healthcare and medicine research. but the one you choose will largely depend on your topic. Scopus is quite a good one. Anything really in the EBSCO interface, but like I say, it can largely depend on your own experience and the topic you're working on. I mean, the great thing is, I mean, there really is no hard and fast heuristic to help you decide what one to use. So take your time at the beginning and consider what possible resources you might want to use. So consider databases and supplementary resources as well. So bibliographic databases, citation indexes, institutional repositories. And what databases to search? Again, like I said, depends on the nature of your research question. Something else to also emphasize, because it's something I see conflated an awful lot in the literature, is a database platform and a database are not the same thing. And I see this quite a lot in systematic reviews where people say they've searched EBSCO or they've searched Ovid. Ovid and EBSCO are the publishers of database platforms. So bear that in mind when you're reporting. So you can get Medline on National Library of Medicine, EBSCO, ProQuest, and Ovid. It's the content of the database is determined by the database producer, not the provider. So the interface and how you search it, to a certain extent, it's up to the interface. So you should also know that one of the other questions I get is when to stop searching. When is enough enough? And there really isn't an answer for that, because it goes by a law of diminishing returns. You can try and search everything if you want. Theoretically, it's possible, but philosophically, it's absolutely mad, and it's a dreadful waste of time. You have to consider factors like time constraints, resources like databases, institutional infrastructure, your own skills, time scales. These are all limitations. Be selective about what resources you do search, because bear in mind that you can write a protocol where you include 10 databases, but if I see 10 databases listed in a protocol, I expect to see all of those searched when it's published. So bear that in mind and be realistic. It's all about pragmatism at this stage, because if you select 10 databases, it can take anywhere between 50 to 100 hours to construct, run, and process a large bank of searches. And even when you get the results, you will still have to process them. You will still have to process, well, depending on how many you retrieve, potentially thousands and thousands of results, and that's your time. And at a fiscal level, that's money. You will still have to process all of these records and sift through them all. You have to balance what's possible with what is actually achievable. Another thing to consider is journal coverage. So where journals are indexed, and this can impact on what databases you choose. If we take a journal like Stroke, that's indexed. Journals are generally indexed not just in one database, but multiple ones, which is why it's better if you search databases than journal websites. Stroke, for example, is indexed in about 10 different citation indexes and bibliographic databases like CAB, Abstracts, CINAHL, Medline, Science Citation Index Expanded. I mean, from a journal publisher's point of view, that essentially helps ensure maximum discoverability for the journals. And inevitably, it also means that when you conduct a search across one topic and similar databases, so if I conduct a search across Medline, CINAHL, and Web of Science, I would expect to find results from Stroke in all of them. You will get duplicate results. That's a natural part of the process. It's not something to get freaked out about. It's something that I would say you should generally expect. But also, have a look at the journal itself. So say you will know some key journals, so don't discount what you already know in that respect. Look at the About journal information on the website and see where it's indexed, then this might give you a few indications about which databases might be worth using. Some maybe that you didn't know about before. At this stage, again, keep that in your search document. Write that down in your log. And search strings themselves can be long, complex, and technical. And not all database platforms are designed for that. So again, bear this in mind and take your time. Now here's the really fun part, Boolean logic. Now the cool thing about Boolean logic is it underpins virtually every database you're ever going to use in this process and probably even in your spare time. It all works on simple logic of positive, negative statements of and, or, and not. You can construct very, very simple or very, very complex searches using this. And however you do it, it will be with Boolean logic and the simple and, or, and not statements. And this is our question. So once we have a research question, we can start deconstructing it and identify the key concepts. So what are the key aspects of this question? And there's a lot to this question. And on the face of it, I'd say there's two concepts here: vocalizations and magpies, and social interactions to a certain extent. So what I would start doing is just looking at each of these in isolation, not in relation to one another, in isolation. Take them one at a time and compile a list of synonyms, alternative and related terms and concepts that are present within each of those subjects. And try and restrict your initial selections to the most important and relevant terms, but don't rule anything out at this early stage. You may have identified some keywords, key terms, nomenclature in the articles you've found. So start mapping those out. Even just an Excel document with different columns can be a good way to do it. We may not even use all of these aspects when we construct our final question. It may be that one of these, so magpies and vocalizations, may be the only concepts we need to search. If I add this one in, it may make the results too restrictive. It may not even be necessary if we're expecting a low number of hits. But also, we need to consider, what do we mean by magpies, for example? Now, for example, this is just my own interest coming to light. We could mean different type of magpies. And do we include Australian magpies? Australian magpies are not true magpies as I understand them. They, as far as I know, are a type of shrike, I think. But also how you approach the question considers your background, so area of study. So the terms you use, if you're looking at, say, from a folklore, biology, anthropology, acoustics, this will all affect how you look and what terms you use. As I say, going back to say, are the Australian magpies, do we want to include that? Or is that a separate issue entirely? So we need to bear that in mind with what literature we might find. Because regardless, they are called magpies. And it will come up anyway. So a bit on the difference between keywords and indexing terms. Free text terms are the words in each field of a database record. So the title, abstract. When you go into a database record, you see the author fields, the titles, the keywords, publication information, date it was accessioned into the database. Every piece of information in that record is searchable and can be used as part of your search strategy. But the key fields to use are title and abstract. I mean, in the first instance, in your reconnaissance searches, look in the title. But to get a good broad coverage and to increase the sensitivity of your search in those fields as well. And they are a ubiquitous feature of databases. Every single database can be searched with keywords. So it means any search you have in one database, to a certain extent, with allowing for some minor adjustments and allowing for some of the specifics of certain databases, you can just almost copy and paste one search into another. Controlled vocabulary is very, very different. So think of that as being like an index at the back of a book. Databases, a lot of them will have what's called a controlled vocabulary or index, and it's a selected list of standardized terms and phrases used to index the contents of a database, depending on the subject. For example, Medline uses what's called mesh. Now, that when you combine, because you essentially you search using the controlled vocabulary headings. So when a record is added to a database like Medline, these standardized terms are added to that record on a particular topic, and all records about that same topic will use the same terms. So the idea is no matter what terms would be in the title, if it pertains to, say, our research question and we use the right indexing headings, it should retrieve it. But to further increase the sensitivity, we use a combination of free text terms, so the terms that occur in the title, abstract, or anywhere else in the metadata, along with the controlled vocabulary terms where available. And this helps maximize the retrieval of potentially relevant records. And also, when some records are added, especially new ones, when they're added to a database, they may not have gone through the indexing process. So if you only use controlled vocabulary to search for it, you wouldn't find it. And likewise, some records may not have an abstract and may have a very, very vague title, but may be very well indexed. So a search that would a document that would otherwise be missed by a free text or keyword search, title and abstract, would be picked up by a controlled vocabulary search if the right terms were identified. So it's worth taking a look in the data, say your reconnaissance database, to see what terms have been used to index certain articles. This will give you an idea. And again, don't rule anything out. This is an example of what I would call a more complex search, and a search where keywords and indexing terms work in tandem. This is for antithrombotic treatment after stroke due to intracerebral hemorrhage. The first line here, you have the indexing headings. So all of these within Medline Ovid pertain to stroke, a particular type of stroke. The next 3 lines are the keyword terms, and I'll go into the particulars of these in just a moment. But combining all these together, the idea is that this collection of terms represents one aspect of this question, specifically intracerebral hemorrhage. Now, what I would then do with the antithrombotic part of the question is I would do exactly the same. I would conduct a separate set of searches to collect terms pertaining to that aspect of the question. So as I said before, you deal with each subject, each concept in isolation first. And it really is worth taking the time at this stage to ensure you get it done right. So you try out these different combinations and see what they retrieve. You may find that one that you think is quite vague when combined with something else will retrieve a very, very high number of hits. Or again, it might retrieve far too many. But at this stage, again, we're still not trying to retrieve anything. We are still just testing things out. We are still just testing what our terms actually retrieve. We are still refining what words exactly we want to use and how they best represent our concept. I know it seems like a lot of work to do at the beginning, and that's what Dan's got to remember. Whether you're going to do it 1, 2, 3, or 4 times, take the time to get it done right. Take the time to pick the right terms and prioritize the right terms which represent your topic. This is another example of a database record, as I was saying before. Each one of these fields is one that can be searched. You can see where the words are occurring. This is a Scopus interface. And it is actually quite a good interface. You can, most databases, you can go as in-depth and sophisticated, or you can keep it quite simple. There will be aspects, tools, and components of databases that you need never, ever use. And there may be some that will only be useful at certain times. So take your time to get to know these different aspects and see which ones are going to be most useful. Generally, author keywords, title, and abstract are the ones that I search most of all. Things like digital object identifiers are also especially good if you're looking for something specific or it's a known item you're searching. Just getting ahead of myself here. So searching the title field is a good start. So search using any terms you already know about. And as I said, you're looking quite broadly at this stage. You're still maybe gathering additional terms to add to your query. And you're finding which terms are going to be the preferred, most common primary terms, the not so common terms, terms which occur close by, or even alternative terms. So say, for example, with it, I know I'm going back to stroke, but stroke is one term. Within that, you've got other terms like cerebrovascular accident, or secondary terms like, say, carotid artery sclerosis, which can be part of the etiology of a stroke, or hemiplegia. Now, the problem with that, I know that hemiplegia seems like a leap, but say for hemiplegia, one of the reasons I would include this in any search on stroke is stroke is not the only, can be a cause of hemiplegia, but it's not the only one. Cerebral palsy, physical trauma, congenital disease. However, stroke may not be used in the title or abstract field, but we may find that, say, the RCT or the trial may actually have stroke patients in it. So if I didn't use that term, this might be a paper I'd miss. So just, again, these terms can be ones that are quite vague and maybe don't seem entirely related or relevant at the beginning, but it's worth testing them out, maybe in isolation, to see what you retrieve. And this is quite a good little heuristic as well. So for each collection of terms, just plot them out on this sort of graph. So there's most specific and most important, and then some of the more general terms at the other end. So again, I know we're still in the planning stages, but some of the terms you'll have chosen will be very important and will be the most specific terms to describe it. Some terms may just be shots in the dark and unlikely to retrieve specific results. So try your search with and without them. And this will be easier to account in your write-up. So in your log document, you write in just what hasn't worked and write what has as well, because, well, negative results are still results. But also pay no attention to the amount. To a certain extent, when you conduct your searches in isolation and you feel you're getting thousands and thousands back, try not to think too much about the numbers at that stage, just because it won't be a true reflection of what you get at the end. So say you have one set with 150,000 and another set with 50,000. That isn't going to be a true representation of your final amount. You're going to be combining those, and the actual result you may have to sift through may be much less. But even while you're constructing your search, while keeping the numbers in mind, the most important thing is getting your search terms absolutely right and getting the best ones that best reflect your topic. So Boolean logic allows us to combine keywords using operators and or not. a search query may consist of only one or two, may consist of several hundred. You can do these searches as groups of concepts, or you can do them all in one line. And as I've demonstrated here with Magpie and vocalizations, to me that's a perfectly valid search. That's looking for records where Magpie and vocalizations, those words would occur in that record. The OR allows you to broaden your search, so looking for similar terms. So alternative terms that describe your one concept. So creating these collections of terms or similar terms that describe one particular concept. The not one, I tend really not to use that. I don't really think it's that accurate. Mainly because if you start using a not term to exclude specific results, you may inadvertently exclude something that is actually relevant on the basis that you've decided to exclude it on the basis of one word. Now, this one is quite a good example of it. And while you'll get and or not in every database, specific syntax may vary between database platform, and they may have some of their own proprietary operators. So what I do is create sets using the OR to begin with. So create sets of similar terms which represent one concept of the question. And I keep those to one side. I then do the same with the second component of the question. And I'm still just collecting the right terms at this stage. In my mind, I try not to think about how much I'm going to retrieve. It's not really that important. If you get the terms right, you can ensure that nothing realistically is going to be missed. I mean, there is that fear of missing out. And chances are, as much as you hate to admit it, you will miss something. That's difficult to avoid. And as I said earlier, with the law of diminishing returns, searching more and more and more databases doesn't necessarily help that. You may end up just getting more and more and more back, but nothing new and unique comes from the extra databases you're searching. So accept that you're not going to find everything. It's not so much about increasing certainty, but reducing uncertainty and accepting that while your search can be comprehensive, it cannot find everything. But if you have a good, auditable and exhaustive search, you can at least say that this is your method. This is how you searched. And you can feel a little bit more confident that what you found is representative of your question. So the other ones you've got are additional pieces of search syntax. So parentheses, adjacency operators, and field codes. Now, some of these you'll already be familiar with. Truncation. It's a good way of finding additional terms. So say with vocalizations, what I've done here is stemmed it and created a root term of vocal. Be careful where you put that truncation, because it may locate terms that you weren't intending to locate. So by truncating it at the L there, it will retrieve all words that start with that root, but have different endings. So you've got vocal, vocalize, vocalize, the American spelling, vocalizing, vocalized, vocalization. Now, these are just additional synonyms and additional terms. This would come under the OR. So effectively, truncation is an implied OR. So you've got alternative spellings as well. So say American spellings, UK English spellings. You can account for that in some databases with wildcards. So say like jewelry, harbour. Intracerebral hemorrhage is another good example, because hemorrhage in the American spelling is spelt without the AE. In the UK, well, it's spelt with an E. In the UK, it's an AE. So if I didn't search with a wildcard, chances are I'd miss records that have a different spelling. And as I said, many databases will have their own proprietary codes, and adjacency is a good example of that. Within PubMed, within Ovid, you'll get ADJ3. In EBSCO, I think this one's EBSCO, it's near 3. And what this is it looks for terms close together and within a certain number of spaces. So brain adjacent to stroke. So say if I were to search for that, if I search it with that operator in it, I am searching for these two terms close to one another in a particular field. If I search it just with an and, it will retrieve records where those two words occur just in that one field. It may be that they have no relationship at all. You can also use parentheses to group or nest terms. So group the terms together, so corvid, magpie, raven, crow. And then you can also then use the parentheses again to group other terms. So vocalization, vocal, vocalize, vocalizing, vocalized. That, at the very least, is a perfectly valid search. And there really isn't much of a rule about what number to use. Sometimes it is just trial and error. There's no hard and fast rule for that. But this is how the search can begin to look. So I start to run it, say, in this case, I ran it in Web of Science. So this search, so this question translates roughly into this. And this is just my first try. The search could expand a bit more. I could use some different terms, but this is the ones I'm starting with. So I would run this and see what I get. And that's not a bad amount, but I think to myself, how can I expand on that? Is there anything I'm missing? What other alternative terms am I missing? Could I truncate more? Could I make better use, or could I make use of certain syntaxes that I haven't used? So I would take a look at these and see, is this truly representative of my topic? So maybe try adding in some additional terms, taking some away, and then rerunning the search. And it may take several goes. It may take several goes just to have a look and see what's actually worked. But you also will want to look and see if there are any possible amendments, mistakes, syntax errors, or maybe something you've missed. And it also provides, you may also want to get a colleague to peer review it. And this adds an extra level of due diligence and credibility to improve the quality of your search. As good as your search is, there may be something you've overlooked. So it's important to think critically about your results and not just take them for granted. And once, like I say, once you've produced your draft and you've tested it in your preferred database and you're happy with it, you ensure you've got the correct operators all in the right place. It also helps if you've got some articles you already know about. So a few slides back, I showed you the author fields and I showed you some unique fields that each database will have. And what you'll maybe want to do is create a search of those unique identifiers. And that way you can sort of verify your search. Is it picking up these key papers? The other things you can do is reference tracking, auto alerts, grey literature. I mean, how far you go into your search depends entirely on your topic. You can go as deep as you want. But whether or not you dive into the grey literature is, again, it depends entirely on project timescales and limitations. You will also have tools like text mining, which is a very, very useful complementary resource to assist with query building and identifying new keywords and phrases and emerging topics. And this is just me getting a pot shot in. It's a rule I hear quite a lot, like people are looking for nothing older than 10 years. It is a lazy, dubious, and unreliable way of reducing the amount of results you're going to try and get back. Because projects can take a lot of time to fund and execute and get published. And it can take anywhere between several months to several years to get a paper published. Research moves fast, but it doesn't move that fast. And to me, it's quite a clumsy way of helping to isolate more relevant literature. And it belies the potential inaccuracies it can introduce. The real strength of research will come in choosing the correct terms, getting your structure absolutely right. And the answer that's really, really got to bear in mind is pragmatism. It's not important that you're only getting within the last 10 years. It's important that the concepts in your question are best represented by your search. And if you're ever going to include a limitation, there needs to be a very, very good way of doing it. And I've never found a good reason to say no more than 10 years. So if you've got a high quality search, you do not need to look any old, you do not need to apply a clumsy heuristic like nothing older than 10 years. Sometimes there's very, very good reasons for it, but it can depend entirely on your topic. And because, as I said, all databases will run on Boolean, you then can translate your draft search from your main database, from your long document into other databases. And this can be quite simple. I would also then recommend taking some time in the morning, afternoon, so run your searches in one distinct phase. Don't run them in a very haphazard one after the other over a period of several weeks. Do it in a day, because then you'll have all your resources in one go, and you'll have one accurate last search date, and you'll know when to run it again. It also helps keep your results consistent and in one place. Export your results to RIS files and give them sensible names. This is just belt and braces at this stage. And I would like to emphasize at this point, the work that librarians and information specialists do is often overlooked. The search process is an intellectual activity that often is overlooked and not regarded as an important part of the process, but it is one that underpins everything that comes after it. So constructing an effective search strategy requires critical thinking, nuances of language, subject knowledge, and some critical thinking about developing logical search strings and making decisions about which databases to go for. I mean, philosophically, it's not possible to be comprehensive in the most literal sense, but whether we like it or not, there will be limitations. And again, it's something that will underpin everything that comes after it. So thank you very, very much. And I know that's a very, very broad overview, and it's difficult to be general when it comes to searches. But if you have any questions that occur to you later on, do please email me. As I said, there's no such thing as a daft question. It's essentially a knowledge gap. And whether it's simple or complex, I don't mind. It's what the librarians and library services are here for. And at the end here, I've got some useful resources. And I've also got some references and resources that you might want to take a look at. Again, most of these are medicine, but that's where the lion's share of most of the work on, say, systematic literature searching has taken place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Josh. It was a very valuable presentation, very informative, very thorough and meticulous. I'm not surprised. I found it very valuable, especially with the examples, and it's great. It's just unfortunate that we don't have so much time for questions.
I'm sorry about that.
But it's good. I think we all enjoyed it. I think for something of this nature, the thoroughness is so important. Well, I think, of course, the PPT, I think a lot of people are asking. So Josh, are you happy to send me the slides? Because everybody wants to have a copy of the slides.
Yeah, sure thing.
So I will send, Josh has gladly said you will be receiving the slides, so thank you. A lot of people, I think just one question. So somebody is asking, how many years of publication do you suggest, if not for 10 years? I think.
I don't. I don't really add any years of publications unless there's a specific reason to add within 10 years or 20 years or 30. There really isn't much of a reason to do that. Because if you do, you run a risk of excluding something that falls out with the 10-year rule. So if you have constructed a good search and can reduce it and can select the right terms that fully represent your topic, that is the best way to locate relevant records. So applying a limitation like 10 years isn't really that effective.
Okay, good, Josh. I think it's a question by Dr. AB. I think just asked the question twice. How can one address a situation where an exact indexing term cannot be in one or two of the databases searched?
Well, database indexes vary from one to the other. So for each database you're going to search, you would see if the index exists. And if you've got some relevant papers in front of you that you would expect to find, search and see if that paper is in that database, and then see which indexing terms have been applied to it. It will vary from database to database. So a paper that's in, say, Medline or Embase will have different indexing terms. So it's worth taking a look at these databases to see what index they're using and what indexing terms represent a paper. This will then inform which ones you then add to your strategy.
Okay, thanks very much, Josh. Any from the audience, any question you want to ask Josh? We only just have 1 minute. Anybody that wants to ask Josh any question? Okay, I think this one is asking, for the document types, can I select only journals, not books?
You can do. That depends entirely on the interface you're using. Within each database, like within each database platform, like EBSCO or Web of Science or Ovid, there will be options to restrict your search by publication type, say books or journals. But it may even get more specific on that depending on the database coverage. So within Ovid Medline, you can restrict your database searches by trial protocols, by systematic reviews, by practice guidelines, editorials, letters. That is one of the only times I ever really use an exclusion filter, say to exclude, say, letters or abstracts, if that is going to be one of the limiters. The limiters you have will depend entirely on your question and the inclusion and exclusion criteria of your project. So at the start, that's worth bearing in mind. But then again, depending on how many results you get back from a search, it may not even be worth your time adding a limiter. So say if you've got, say, 140 back, that's a perfectly manageable amount. So you don't really need to add any more limiters.
Hey, just thank you so much. I think we're run out of time. And the analysts were saying, thank you, and very helpful. I appreciate an in-depth look at Boolean logic and text mining in the future, if possible. So I think she's already suggesting something that just you might want to think about going forward. Well, it was great having everybody here. Thank you so much for the valuable representation. Almost everybody is saying thank you. Everybody found this informative. To stay on that of everybody. It was great, very informative. Now we know how to develop a search string better. We know what it is. And like I said, I hope we all found it useful, and we did. And thank you so much, Josh. And thank you everyone for attending. I know it's not easy with a lot of us marking at the moment. So I'm happy to see everybody here today. So it's great. I think at least it's still shining. It's not so cold. So at least we can use some part of that. So thank you. Okay, so thank you. Okay, I think
It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you all the day. If you've got any questions, do just visit the library, get in touch, email us, whatever. I know it's been a lot to cover.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you everyone, and everybody. I can see Jeanette, I can see Paula, I can see Leon. Thank you all, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care and
take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.